Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has made time for this session this afternoon. Thank you so much. It's going to be an interesting session. I know Sam quite well from my times in the Pacific days. So let me first start off with some sort of house rules. I'm sure many of you have joined before, but please feel free to ask questions by adding them in the chat bar, and then we will be saving a few minutes at the very end to sort of put these to some ADB staff who are also attending, or Sam, and we'll invite broader comment. So let me first introduce Sam. So Sam Johnson is a sustainable transport specialist with the World Bank, and at the moment he is a visiting researcher at the Technical University of Eindhoven, focusing on innovation and urban mobility transitions. A civil engineer, Sam has worked with the World Bank for 8 years in transport infrastructure advisory roles spanning planning, design, construction, maintenance, and financing. He also, in his spare time, co-leads World Bank's active mobility community of practitioners, and he has a Masters of Global Development Practice from Harvard University. With a specific passion for road safety, Sam is a strong advocate for people-centric urban design and moving away from car dependency. He will today present this guide to mobility for livable Pacific cities. It was released late last year, and its goal was to influence better system designs. It targets more sustainable, safe, affordable, and people-friendly transport systems. It aims to give detailed advice on how to create livable streets for people, promote public transit, and manage private vehicle ownership. To manage or limit private vehicle ownership and use. The guide is an important reference document. We feel that it can catalyse a coordinated region-wide investment programs amongst the Pacific, and if organisations like the ADB and the World Bank and bilateral partners promote the use of this design document on their projects, then it will, over time, influence practice. So, look, thank you, Sam, for joining. It's a delight to see you again after such a long time. I'll hand over the floor.
Thank you, David. It is absolutely lovely to be talking to you. David and I have been working together as the World Bank and ADB does all the way back since 2017, when I first started in the Pacific. But I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen and get started. I will say that what I'm going through today will be let's say, an entree of the guide, because it's quite an expansive document. And for that reason, actually in partnership with the ADB and the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, which coordinates all the development partners in the Pacific, we did a 3-month-long webinar series breaking down each of the chapters of the guide. So if this particular strategy you're interested in, be it road safety or be it vehicle management, we have a dedicated 1-hour webinar just on that topic. So I'll share a link to those URLs and the guide itself. But thank you very much for having me. This work was, first of all, obviously not just me. We had a big team within the World Bank and staff working with us. Fantastic design studio in Fiji, and some excellent peer reviewers. But in particular, I want to thank the 129 graduates of the Pacific Leaders in Urban Transport Planning Program that work with us, and we took their feedback into account to come up with this vision for mobility in the Pacific. So for those unfamiliar with the Pacific, when I say the Pacific Islands, I'm talking about World Bank member states in the Pacific, but the guide is relevant to all Pacific countries, and indeed all small island developing states. The principles and strategies are relevant. And basically what we were seeing was that many of these countries, there's rapid increase in the motorization rate. And the response to that had been largely reactionary and was not leading to outcomes that would be best for livability of people. And when I say livability, I don't just mean from a mobility sense or congestion sense, I mean in many other aspects. And so we're basically on a path, it's not great for everyone. For drivers, more congestion, public transport, less services or more irregular services, stuck in traffic jams with the limited right of way that we see in many Pacific and island contexts, less investment and worse conditions for pedestrians and cyclists, and then of course the end of life vehicle waste management issue that is ubiquitous. It seems like what you see at the bottom. So the question is, do Pacific cities, and when I say Pacific cities, you could insert that as small island developing state cities generally, really need to be car dependent. What we've noticed is that in larger urban centers, there's this phase of rapid car use, leveling off, and then a decline at much expense, as we see many cities around the world are doing to try to reduce their dependency. And so the question is, while Pacific cities are still at a relatively low rate of motorization, meaning number of vehicles per capita, is it time to shift path and leapfrog ahead so that there doesn't have to be a more expensive and challenging course correction down the line? And just looking at the geography in the Pacific and the density of population, it does have environments that are ripe for sustainable transport. So what you see on the right is in Honiara, 65% of the urban population is within 3K radius of the city centre. In Suva, it's 64%, and it's similar in other regions of the Pacific. And what this means is that you have a large proportion of the population within a walkable and bikeable distance, or definitely within a distance that, when combined with public transport, you could have large proportions of the population not having to use a car for their everyday trips. So what this requires is a flip in the thinking of how urban mobility has been historically prioritized and funded. If we look at the way our road standards are currently designed, and as well as our funding generation frameworks, they are kind of creating a system where the car is prioritized, and cycling and public transport and walking receive measurably less support. And so what we're saying is that there should be, if we want to see a change in the way our cities are designed to make them more livable, there needs to be a change in the design standards and in the funding arrangements and the policies that go along with that. And then that's why we wrote this guide to mobility, to provide a guidance on strategies and actions that Pacific cities and SIDS generally could take. And I encourage you to scan these QR codes. There will be another chance later in the presentation. And how we landed at this, as I said, was after doing an extensive study. We think this guide's, it's not perfect, but it's an important reference document to all governments and development partners working in urban centres across small island developing states. And part of it, and why we've been, why I'm doing this webinar and why we've been doing a lot with other development partners, is that we know World Bank can't do it all, and we want to coordinate our vision and our investments in support of this guide. So as I said, it's quite a long document. So we've split it into two parts. Part one is very much to the point and just listing the main actions in a way that's more relevant to high-level decision makers, so that then they can use these actions to put into their national strategies and plans that are adopted by government. And then part two is about 300 pages and much more detailed, explaining exactly how you would go about implementing those strategies and actions. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is give you a taste of each of those strategies. So we've set these three guiding goals of what mobility for livable cities should be, which is to create livable streets for people, to promote public transport, and to manage, not ban, importantly, but manage private vehicle ownership and use. This is organized. This is what is used to organize our 9 strategies. So in support of goal A, we have ensuring safe urban speeds, designing streets to prioritize walking and cycling, tactical urbanism, and then education, encouragement, and evaluation measures to help change the culture around a sustainable transport. Under public transport, we have these strategies of making the bus the best choice for getting to the city. And we emphasize to the city there, not within the city, but to the city. And then relatedly, on how to reform land use planning to guide compact city development. And lastly, on managing private vehicle ownership, we look at advice on how to control the vehicle quantity and quality on entry to the island during use, and then how to manage the waste and the recycling opportunities that come when the vehicle reaches end of life. Of course, then in a place like the Pacific where land is very scarce and valuable, it also makes sense to look at how we can manage parking better. And then with the great hype for electric mobility, we did an extensive review of the different types of e-mobility options out there and a multi-criteria analysis of their appropriateness in the Pacific and in SIDS generally. So breaking it down further, each strategy has its own action plan where we have, in a stylized way, tried to give some advice to readers on the complexity, the capital cost, the ongoing costs, the specific cities and countries where we think this solution is most urgently needed, and then giving a sense of the year in which we think this action should start. And this is just stylized. It doesn't mean that it's 2025 now, and if an action isn't done by 2025, oh, it's too late. It's just to give a relative sense of the priority. And of course, government's own competing needs will influence the order of things. So why did we make this guide to mobility for congestion reduced Pacific cities? Why was that not the title? Why did we go with livable Pacific cities? It's because we're trying to say good mobility and accessibility is good for development generally. So we're expecting outcomes like less congestion and less cost, and less road harm, but also improved health, improved inclusion, more equitable through making the design of the street more accessible for children and people with kids and people with disabilities, less stressful, more efficient use of public space, reduce carbon emissions, and many other co-benefits. So what I'm going to do now is just go through each of the strategies in a very quick and dirty way to give you a sense and pique your interest if you want to learn more about it. And as I said, you can do that through the guide, but also through the detailed webinar series that I'll share. So on this first strategy one, which we think is central to everything, is that urban speed limits, as in law, are still far too high in the Pacific Islands, and that it makes sense for there to be widespread reductions in the speed limit, except on some main corridors where, with having appropriate road safety interventions in place, they can still remain higher. And this will be good for road safety, but broadly it's about city building. What would this look like in practice? Just as a stylized example, this is in Nuku'alofa, Tonga, where the existing default speed limit is 50 k's an hour, and with some localized very short sections of 30 k's an hour. applying this policy would mean that the main corridors could still remain 50 k's an hour, but all of these sections in yellow, the local roads, the tertiary roads, the sections of main roads where they go past schools, they would be reduced down to a 30k an hour speed limit. Out the front of schools, this could look like putting in raised threshold crossings, like you see in this image. It could also use a variety of speed humps. These ones that you see here are for very severe traffic calming, but basically you get the principle. So turning this into an action plan, we suggest that there should be changes in the default speed limits, and then accompanying that, of course, there needs to be physical and cultural measures put in place to facilitate the change. So this can start with speed limit signs, a widespread program of putting in raised crossings at key areas where many people cross now or would cross in the future, speed enforcement, gateway treatments, or speed humps, narrowing intersections using line marking and bollards, and changing the width of travel lanes to create more space for footpaths, etc. Each of these icons you see here are an own subchapter in the guide where you can get more information. So moving on to strategy 2, this one here is focused on how do we change the way our streets are designed to make them more convenient for people walking and cycling and more attractive. And we understand that there's some way to go on this. So we think it's best to prioritize town centers and near routes near schools and markets. And then in the case of the Pacific, we think that, like is being seen all around the world, the electric throttle bicycle and the electric assist bicycle have tremendous untapped potential to change mobility patterns. So what does this look like in practice? Well, on a shopping street like this, it would mean changing the parking arrangement. This is still the same right of way, by the way, but this new arrangement would leave much more space for walking, shading, cycle tracks, etc. And we have a whole lot of diagrams like this, visualizations. This is another example of a less traffic street in Honiara, where you could put in place a road pavement that encourages very slow speeds by the cars so that the road space can be shared with other modes of transport. Then along corridors like rivers and creeks and along the seafronts, you could have a recreational network of walking and biking tracks that we know from all around the world are extremely popular and keystone elements of a tourism strategy. We also think that in some cases, share bike systems can make sense, especially in those Pacific Island countries that have seasonal or high intensity periods of lots of tourists. For example, when a cruise ship comes in or during school holidays, etc., whereby you could use this to provide a transport solution for the visitors and charge them a premium for it, and then have an annual subscription for local residents, which is in effect subsidized by the tourists, which has been done with success in Hawaii and many other island contexts. What would this look like in practice? This is a stylized cycling network for Tonga, but this could be another Pacific Island city. But the principle here is that it's not about putting segregated cycle lanes on every street. We know that's not possible. It's about having a network in place of a variety of solutions so that people can feel safe and comfortable cycling anywhere within the city. This as well has got a plan starting from doing a diagnostic and walking and cycling network assessment, looking at the bike parking needs for the city, a program of prioritized footpath improvements, seating, lighting, shading, a whole lot of measures that I won't go into now because of time constraints, but you get the sense. We also know, speaking of time, that things take a very long time to um, build new infrastructure in the Pacific and in island context generally. So there's a place for tactical urbanism, which is this approach of using temporary materials and temporary measures to trial changes in street alignment and street design. And we think this has great potential in the Pacific. We did a first trial of this in South Tarawa last year, and this involved working with the school students at the front of a school to think about how they could make the front of their school safer, and then actually involving the school students to put in place road narrowing, a new pedestrian crossing, street planters, cleaning up the area, moving abandoned cars. And we did data on this, and it um, significantly reduced the travel speeds of cars coming through here, and also greatly increased the yielding of car drivers to people going in and out of the school. And that was just a quick and dirty proof of concept, but we think that this has potential for massive use across the Pacific. More permanent, but still temporary measures could be like what you see here of transforming the main route in Tonga to take away some travel lanes by rediverting the traffic onto surrounding roads and putting in alfresco dining, um, putting in a temporary cycle lane. But there are various arrangements you could do. Similarly, at intersections, which are sized to have a very wide radii, you can take space, but do it in a beautiful way that says something symbolic and also supports your tourism plans. So in the case of tactical urbanism, all of these actions are very much geared to the here and now, because we think that the design time and the cost of implementation is so much less, and so you can get going now. And details on how to approach tactical urbanism in design guidance is all included in the guide. Going on to strategy 4, this is about that build it and they will come, be it building, walking and cycling infrastructure. It does not necessarily mean that it's enough. It's important but insufficient to create a change in mobility habits. And so this is about focusing on education, encouragement and evaluation of measures, really focusing on the school traffic drop-off run to consider how we can change mobility habits, people getting to work and walking and biking. So this what you see on screen is an example of this, what you hear very often, which is people would love their kids to be able to walk to school, but they feel it's too dangerous. And so they end up actually making conditions worse, because we are all traffic. We are all part of this unvirtuous cycle. So what would a virtuous cycle look like? Well, it means it has to start sometime, and it starts with getting more people walking and cycling to school. And then we know from seeing this around the world that if you do this enough, it becomes a cultural norm, and then it ends up being on this virtuous feedback loop. But the government and civil society actors need to help kickstart this virtuous cycle, and this can be done through walk to school, cycle to school trainings. It can be done through government agencies walking the talk, like here in Samoa, where the police force now use e-bikes to get around to do some of their services. But that could be many government agencies could be interested in that. In terms of the actions, again, emphasizing, we think that it's important to work on active travel to school programs Not just because it's good for kids' health, um, and many other benefits, but also because in many cities, it's the school pick up and drop off that is a major, major contributor to the traffic congestion program. We also recognize that a big part of why walking and cycling is not done is in some cities there's a lot of stray dogs, which provide a very real and also in your mind deterrent that cycling and walking is not safe. So then that's to be done. There needs to be social and marketing campaigns, and we give examples of how the places have gone about that. And it could also make sense to change the taxation regime such that bicycles and e-bikes purchasing and maintenance is a little bit cheaper, just in the same way that many countries put in place much more expensive tax exemption schemes for electric cars. It would make sense to apply at least as good preferential treatment to bicycles and e-bikes. Looking at major employers and sources of trips, such as universities and national government agencies, it could make sense to put in place bike and e-assist purchase and maintenance schemes, or indeed we have a very large employer, say like the Ministry of Infrastructure, where a lot of people go to a place and do small trips around the city. It could make sense for them to have their own bicycle e-fleet or fleet of normal bicycles for doing everyday trips and also trips to work. Moving on to the goal of getting people to the city with the bus, we feel that this is absolutely critical for Pacific Island cities to have a shot at reducing car dependency. And because of the expense and complexity of public transit, we think this should be elevated as a national government policy priority rather than leaving it as a responsibility of the city itself. And we know, based on the topology and geographic spread of cities, that many, many trips could be replaced or at least maintained the mode share of public transport if the right conditions were in place. And so what are the right conditions? Well, it means having fantastic infrastructure. This is in Noumea. It means having, which is inexpensive, but having the latest payment systems to make it convenient and quick for customers. It means, in some cases, electric buses to reduce the operating costs. And it could mean even to further reduce operating costs, it could mean when new depots are built or they are upgraded, that you have on-site solar energy generation to supply the electric buses. In terms of changes to the corridors, we think that there is a place in some Pacific cities for transit ways, like you see here. This is in Tongatapu. Or in the case of Honiara, where this corridor already has huge volumes of public transport users, it makes sense to consider a short section of bus rapid transit or bus rapid transit-like experiences with a central running bus lane. So how to go about this, I'm not going to go into details of it, but the process goes through of doing a diagnostic of how the system currently works, evaluating the network, the current scheduling, how information shared with the public, etc., and then going through a capital works program of fleet renewal, industry transition, etc., etc. I won't go into all of this just in the interest of time, but it's all there in the guide, and we can talk about it in questions. So complementing this, that we see that land use planning policies and guidance is basically, in some sense, creating a car-centric sprawl that we see in neighbouring areas in Australia and New Zealand in the island context, which is really not Pacific appropriate in my personal view. We are using parking minimum standards and setback requirements that mean that we will end up with, this is obviously a stylized over example, but it basically means that the land use pattern is one that encourages and requires private vehicle ownership. What could make more sense is this concept of this is the 15-minute city, which has recently been popularized. But the idea is that you try to make as many services as possible accessible within a short walk or bike or public transit trip. And in the space constrained context of the Pacific, this makes particularly good sense. So what does this mean? For starters, changes in minimum parking requirements and adopting maximum rules in downtown so that the most valuable land is not turned into parking garages. It means further changes to land use regulations and local area plans that I won't go into now, but details of how to do so are in the guide. So moving on to our last goal, this is on the strategy of controlling what vehicles come in, their quality and their quantity through their life cycle. And we feel that this is a low-hanging fruit that Pacific Island countries and SIDS generally are importing countries. They are not producing countries of vehicles. And at that point of entry, it's I guess to say it in coarse terms, it's a case of garbage in, garbage out. If you can have great quality vehicles coming in then that live a long life and are maintainable, then it greatly reduces the problem. So we say you should control the type and conditions, establish appropriate inspection services once they are in country, and then work on cleaning up the vehicle situation, because it is a big problem, and it is, in my experience, a great source of worry in the sense of national pride, but also safety for people, and it blights the idyllic tourism image of island countries. So what does this mean in practice? It means that, for starters, vehicles imported need to have proof of ownership. We give specific advice on mechanic workshop support that government can give. But critically, we think that there should be minimum import standards that you see on screen put in place across the board in Pacific countries. And in many, many countries, the current import standards are not there. They're very lax. Related to fuel efficiency and emissions, we suggest that in Fiji, because they're a bit further ahead, they can start looking at moving up to minimum Euro 6 fuel standards. Similarly, there are benefits in having common fuel specifications across the Pacific from a economic cost efficiency point of view. And that top point there that you have on end of life vehicle advanced recovery fee and deposit levy, this is something that is important to make sure that government can start to have a kitty to be able to go and collect and process and ship off island the end of life vehicles. And many countries are in various states of readiness to legislate this. And I know, for example, in Kiribati, they intend to adopt this policy sometime later this year. Then, of course, once the vehicle is on island, we see that many vehicles die an early death because they can't get a specific part, or the mechanic is not available. And so we make the case for national government-led upskilling programs of maintenance and mechanics, so that those vehicles that are on island, they last 10 years plus, rather than the common under 2 years that we see in many countries. And then there's obviously a place for education and awareness campaigns to consumers, so that not only is there mandatory requirements from government on the minimum standards of vehicles coming in, but also that consumers become more aware that if certain types of cars with certain characteristics are going to give them better value for money in the long run. Okay, so you've got your car in the country. Then wanted to look at how parking is managed in the islands, and we felt that, and this is a change in thinking. In some cases, it can mean in the very, very core of the city, parking should be priced, and the pricing should be set at a price that is going to influence parking demand, but also is focused on generating revenue that can then be used for other public good in the region where the parking fine is not parking fine, the parking fee is collected. So what we don't want to have happen is, this is in neighboring Noumea, where the downtown, all the area you see in red, is dedicated to surface level parking lots. And this isn't a most efficient use of space, because all that area could be shops and businesses and generating revenue rather than just being a free parking lot. We also don't want parking to happen haphazardly and take up the limited space that is available for people walking, like you see here in Honiara. In the case of on-street paid parking, it could make sense, and this is just illustrative in Tonga, but you could think of this as another city too, to have a graduated pricing scheme where in the core of the city there is a higher rate, and then in surrounding areas there is a lower rate. And we know, for example, in Suva, where they already have a similar scheme, but they have the prices set at prices from several decades ago, and it's not generating anywhere near the revenue or having an effect on parking demand that it could. So setting parking strategy means you need to know what you're dealing with, which means surveying parking supply and demand, and then setting out reforms based on that. And critically changing to minimum parking requirements and ways where parking can occur at the front of new developments is where there are opportunities. But critically, because parking is, especially pricing for parking, is this very sensitive topic to the public, it's important to make sure you can show that it's not just a revenue collection scheme to increase the salaries of government officials. It's about investing the money back into the community to make streets more livable and pleasant for them. And especially, we are skeptical and think that the business case for multi-level story parking needs to be really strongly made, because the evidence is clear that if there is convenient and affordable on-street parking, these facilities are underutilized, and they're very expensive for government to build. So finally, moving on to adopting island-appropriate electric vehicles. The point of this strategy was to expand the consideration beyond just looking at four-wheeled electric vehicles to do a comprehensive review of all the different electric vehicles form factors coming on the market. And our advice here is that e-bikes, from a technical and an economic standpoint, e-bikes and e-two-wheelers and microcars are particularly promising, and they should be considered and promoted by government in addition to the promotion going on for battery electric four-wheelers. So how do we assess island appropriateness? We didn't just go with our personal opinion. We tried to make it verifiable, and we went through a multi-criteria analysis taking into account all these aspects, where we rated and compared different forms of electric vehicles and also to their ICE equivalents. And based on that rubric, we come up with this evaluation that these modes in particular are high value and should be considered supported. And even without very little government support, these modes are already becoming popular, like you see in Vanuatu with e-bike tourism schemes coming into place, and the same thing with e-scooters, and also the application of lightweight electric small open air buses like you see here. And of course, this is in the Marshall Islands, where EVs are already here, and they have been here for many years already. What does this mean? We see there's a role for a regional consumer education and awareness program on the different forms of EVs out there and their relative costs and benefits. And then critically, just as with ICE vehicles, we think that there needs to be um, minimum safety requirements for EVs put in place so that that the Pacific doesn't just become a dumping ground for end-of-life electric vehicles. So specifics of that are in the guide. So this has been a very quick crash course of all the content in the guide. I think you can get the impression there's a lot in there, and I'm happy to have a discussion with you all and take questions. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam. I certainly got the impression that there was a lot in there to be taken on. So, look, before I actually go into a few of the questions, it struck me that there's across the Pacific and certainly across Asia, there's significant differences in approaches to active mobility. I know in the Philippines, for example, we live here in Manila, of course. It's the weather is hard. It's very hot and it can get very wet. Yet there are lots of people who ride bicycles. And my time in Fiji, I always wondered, gee, there's lots of space that would be relatively safe, and very few people rode bicycles. Now, I've noticed that you sort of moved into e-bikes and electric vehicles and so forth, but the guy didn't touch on motorbikes, which are a significant number of people, in the larger Asian countries. I'm just sort of wondering if you can come back and talk about motorbikes and why that was or was not considered in this work.
Yeah,
Also, if you could touch on cultural differences across the Pacific, and I'm very interested to hear if the World Bank have put their finger on a potential project in the Pacific to demonstrate this, or whether there's been a discussion with the ADB on opportunities to incorporate these elements in any ADB pipeline projects.
yeah, great questions. So I'll split it into three parts. The first one on seeing more people just using general bicycles, like pedal bicycles in the Pacific. You'll be interested to know that in Fiji, by their own efforts, the Fiji government has just built a whole lot of cycleways down in downtown Suva, and they are now doing this year they'll start a full-blown long-term walking and cycling infrastructure investment plan. So the things are changing, and what we see across the world is that weather does have an effect, but it doesn't have nearly as much of an effect as whether or not there's safe infrastructure in place. So we see that it can be a very hot place, a very cold place. But if you've got environment there that makes it feel safe and comfortable, people will do it. And so across the Pacific, governments are starting to get on board with this. So, for example, in Tonga, just this year we had a request to also do a walking and cycling development plan for the main island of Tonga. On the point of motorcycles, it's actually in the Strategy 9. We did do an evaluation of two-wheeled electric bikes, and the reason why when I say electric bikes, I mean electric motorcycles. And the reason why we focused on that and not on getting an uptake of ICE motorcycles is that it is the case in the Pacific that ICE motorcycles have a very low mode share. And now the new electric vehicle motorbikes have a lower cost, low operating costs. So it makes sense if they are going to adopt them, which we're not against them being adopted, but they should just leapfrog ahead. But we do feel that against speed is the biggest danger with motorcycles, which is why if they are to be brought in, there needs to be a speed environment through the road design. But even it's something else to consider. But even through the use of speed limiters, which can be put into motorcycles nowadays, that could be something for governments to consider. But we know that since governments are they mainly, the vast majority of vehicles being imported are secondhand, they're unlikely to get speed limiter technology coming to the Pacific soon. So infrastructure is the way to go. And then on cultural change and cultural preferences, all I can say is that this guide has been really well received by the governments, and we've had several requests for World Bank projects to be informed by the guide. So, for example, we're now doing a public transport development plan for South Tarawa in Tonga, and same in Suva. We're doing end-of-life vehicle management for Kiribati, and the requests keep coming in. So I think governments, it is resonating with them that this is the way forward.
How about ADB? Has anyone reached out?
Yeah, the ADB was the ADB is in the Pacific is currently doing some let's say aligned activities. For example, in Tonga, no, not in Tonga, in Port Moresby, they have funded a sustainable urban mobility plan for Greater Port Moresby, which is very aligned with these principles. But then other development partners are also doing new projects in a similar vein. For example, in JICA, they are doing a plan for public transport for Palau. In ADB is doing one in Timor-Leste right now. All across the board, projects more aligned with these strategies are starting to appear in the pipelines.
Good. There would appear to be an opportunity in Port Vila post the big earthquake.
Yeah, absolutely. So ADB should do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll try to influence some sort of outcome. So, Dr. Greenwood, he put a comment in here that mentioning that car ownership is, of course, a status symbol. It is in every country, of course. And the question is, how do we make taking the bus it's better than owning the car? I suppose that's a question all over the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So actually, long-term trends in across the world is that less people are getting their license, and they're getting their license later. So if you look at even in the US, it's the cultural association with the car as being a marker of success and something you have to have is dropping, but that's a slow long-term thing. In the short term, what you can do is by making it the comfortable, convenient, reliable option. And many other countries have had success with doing that in cities that are very car dependent. They put in place a fantastic, reliable service that critically has to be more reliable, as convenient as the car. And you do that by supporting the service, by making sure it's air conditioned, that having small, reliable times when it's going to arrive, by having an app that tells you exactly where it's going to be and when. All of these things now are technology has meant that they're actually not very expensive. So if you put these conditions in place, then we see that there will be mode shift.
Okay.
And
So,
you wrap that around with marketing campaigns run by the state to, for example, in Singapore right now, they have a very successful BMW campaign. So we want everyone to ride in our BMW to work, but they're calling BMW is bike, metro, walk. And other governments do similar marketing campaigns combined with the improvements in the infrastructure and the fleet. And if you do that consistently, you do get a change in travel behavior.
yeah. So Dr. Greenwood also mentioned in New Zealand that schools get organised and different parents take different routes to schools and sort of mix it up. So obviously that sort of conditions children from a very early age to think that that's the default option. So how about through education departments in all these countries? Is there a discussion with them? Was that touched on in the guide?
Yeah, so in the strategy 4, as I alluded to, it's very focused on uh, walking and biking to school arrangements. So we give advice on and show examples of how other countries have worked with ministries of education to get um, training on how to ride a bike, maps of your neighborhood, safe ways to get to school, showing parents how to do it, putting in place. It's very in vogue at the moment, these walking and bike to school buses, where the Ministry of Education, or even just done by local parents, they come up with, in effect, a cycling bus route where you know that the group's going to come past your house at 7:50, and then all the kids in that neighborhood cycle to school together. So there's a place for Ministry of Education to do things like that, and actually we do intend to do that in Tonga in under a World Bank project later this year.
Okay. So, ADB is always trying to sort of run urban transport type projects, and one of our focuses is on promoting e-buses and the like. And we try to tap into green climate funding, uh, resources, and any other trust funds or grant funds that we can bring to the table, be they from ADB country allocations. But a World Bank, do they have that view? Are they seeing funding sources come to play to realize these types of opportunities?
So this study actually was funded by a trust fund. We have a thing called the Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, and it's very competitive trust fund, and this proposal won. So, and then when we report back to that donor group about this project, they love it, and they are very, very happy with their investment. So yeah, I think that there's trust funds out there willing to help seed this work, and then so that larger multilateral development investments can follow. Just for example, this study, it immediately in the next year led to 3 times the amount of trust fund money being led to helping implement the solutions of the guide. And then that in turn is influencing 10 times that amount of World Bank financing.
Sure. Yeah, congratulations. That's an encouraging metric. Speaks for itself. So, all right. Well, look, I've really enjoyed the time we've had with you, Sam. It's good to see you after such a long time. For everyone who is attending, particularly developing member country representatives or those who have signed in, remember that ADB and World Bank are sort of demand driven. If you were to sort of instruct us that this is a focus that you would like to pursue in your urban projects, I'm sure that we'd be jumping over each other to get at you and try to help you get these projects up. So look, I hope that this has sort of prompted more awareness and some interest. If I could please ask that you spend a few minutes providing us some feedback on this webinar, that would be great. So thank you, Sam. And of course, thank you to the Transport Group for helping us put this together. Please reach out and let's please keep talking.
Thanks, David. Yeah, very keen to keep collaborating. And thank you everyone for joining.
Goodbye.